بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Tonight inshallah or this evening we will go into our next feminine journey special lecture on the topic of toxic relationships, and this uh, special lecture reality requires much more time than we're able to give it in many ways. And just preparing this, the more I realize this is more like a course, it requires that kind of attention effort. But whatever we're able to present, inshallah ta'ala, today, hopefully will benefit. And maybe in the future we can carry on by adding different elements to the topic. And the title of today's special lecture, Toxic Islamic Guidance in Dealing with Harmful Family Members and Relationships. So really we're addressing toxic relationships. What are those? How to deal with them? What are their effects? What are their signs, etc.? And the reason why I chose this topic is that in many ways, this topic of difficult family dynamics, toxic relationship with family members or loved ones, I even conclude friends, but our focus is today will be on family, is one of the biggest sources and causes for stress and problems in people's lives. If you were to ask any individual today, male or female, what is the biggest difficulty that you're finding in your life, most people would say some sort of relational issue. Someone in their life, family, friends, husband, wife, children, co-worker, neighbor, student, whoever may be, is giving them a difficult or hard time, or they're not able to get along with them. And in many ways, you may also say it's one of the biggest topics when it comes to Islamic counseling and for reasons why people seek therapy and help. And so today, obviously, I'm not coming from that perspective. I'm not a healthcare professional. I'm just presenting the Islamic solutions in the Quran and Sunnah in relation to this topic, as well as an overview from psychology and from experts about what this topic entails. So as we'll see, we encourage people who have these difficulties towards our solutions to seek professional help, as this will be part of the solutions. Not to take any more time, we jump right in. We begin with the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Furqan, ayah 20. And we have made some of you as a trial, for others will you have patience, and your Lord is ever all-seer of everything. And this is, I think, the most appropriate verse to begin with, because it reminds us that people are not only difficult, but that part of that difficulty, that not everybody, but some people in our lives, are a trial. And we must understand that. The quicker that we understand that, and that we also appreciate the fact that this is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's test for us in the life and that we live, then it's easier to begin the journey to finding solutions as well as finding cures and protections. So it's very important to remember, وَجَعَلْنَا بَعْضَكُمْ لِبَعْضٍ فِتْنَةً أَتَصْبِرُونَ. We made some of you, for others, a trial. Will you not be patient? The key word here, sabr, patience. And of course, that's not the only thing, but this is part of it. We have to begin with definitions. What is exactly a toxic relationship? From a psychological perspective, toxicity and toxic is not actually a technical term. So this is one of the challenges that we have to understand, that toxic, and when we say toxic, it's not actually a technical term. It's a terminology that we use, even though it's in the dictionary of recent. It doesn't actually explain what people are not using it the way that they might be thinking it means. So toxic can sometimes overlap with the word abusive, but as we'll see, there's a slight difference. So toxic relationships, according to one of the definitions, well, one person's detrimental behaviors, right? The relationship in which one person's detrimental behaviors that harm the mental and or physical health of another. And that this dynamic often involves manipulation, control, and emotional abuse, leading to feelings of low self-esteem and insecurity for the affected individual. So it's a relationship in which you have two parties or more. There's the person who is the toxic person, who's engaging the perpetual negative behavior or consistent negative, damage, and detrimental behavior. Then there's the victim who's receiving that behavior, and due to this behavior, right, which involves things like control, manipulation, abuse, emotional abuse, lack of support, as we'll see other signs, it leads the victim to having low self-esteem, becoming insecure, lack of support. It affects their physical, mental, and emotional health. So a toxic relationship then is any relationship which is dysfunctional, it's problematic, it's harmful. As we'll see, it's slightly different than abusive relationship, because abuse is a higher category. So that's why the term sometimes is used loosely and sometimes is used incorrectly. Somebody who has, for example, mistakes is not toxic. We use the word toxic in our culture, but too loosely. And so what happens is somebody has, let's say, certain flaws, we call them toxic. That's not true, because we all have mistakes, we all have shortcomings, right? All of the human beings are khata, right? We're mistakeful and making mistakes. So that doesn't mean we're toxic, but it's a consistency, right? The relationship which is consistently characterized by those behaviors. It can incur in romantic partnerships. For us as Muslims, that means marriages, parent-child relationships, siblings and blood relatives, school and work relationships. Our focus is going to be on the familial toxic relationships. And this is the part where it's interesting, because the most likely a toxic relationship incurs in relationships that are difficult to leave. And that's why they're so challenging, so frustrating, because leaving isn't either the first option or a option, sometimes not option, and sometimes it's a very difficult option. Hence, why it's more likely to occur, because sometimes the toxic individual is aware of that, right? That there's a kind of dependency going on here, and therefore leaving is not easy or possible. And we're gonna just preview already that leaving a relationship that can be toxic, or at least limiting it or cutting it off, is part of Islamic solutions. We'll see, but it has rules. Today, our focus is going to be on family toxic relationships, familial toxic relationships, parent and child, sibling and relative. And the reason I'm focusing on these is because this affects everybody. And of course, you can extend it to spousal as well, husband, wife. Right? But we're going to focus on the parent, child, sibling, relative, where it covers and it affects everybody, including affected those before us from the prophets and messengers, alayhim salam, and we're going to use them as examples for us. The signs of a toxic relationship, we should begin with the signs so someone can be aware of what it looks like. Psychologists, they mention a number of signs which are indicators of a toxic relationship, and these are some of them, not all. You give more than you're getting in the relationship, which makes you feel devalued, depleted. You feel consistently disrespected, or that your needs aren't being met. So every relationship, there's something you want to get out of it, and there's something that you're supposed to give into it. So it's a give and take. But in a toxic relationship, you're not getting your needs met, and you're putting in effort, and you're trying your best. Again, provided that the other individual is not toxic. Sometimes two people are toxic. But in a situation where we're saying the one is toxic and the other isn't, you, the victim, if you are in that situation, are not getting your needs met. You're not feeling you're benefiting this relationship. You feel undersupported, misunderstood, demeaned, or attacked. Feel depressed, angry, tired of speaking, after speaking or being with other person. They bring your worst out of you. Right? It's very important, right? Relationships are supposed to bring us closer, trying to bring good out of us. So relationship that where it's going to bring the worst out of you, you start behaving out of character, or you start behaving in a way that is un-Islamic, right? Or it's haram, or it's not you. You're not in your best self around the person. You feel like you have to walk on eggshells. That's a very common one around this person, to keep from becoming a target of their venom. So obviously in that relationship, you're often worried. There's a lot of anxiety, and this is important, right? It creates anxiety. And it's often because you're afraid that with certain missteps and behavior mistakes, or certain interactions will cause you to become a target of their toxicity. And we're going to come back to in terms of the attachment system in relation to toxic relationships. You spend a lot of time and emotional strength trying to cheer them up. You're always to blame. They turn things around, so things you thought they had done wrong are suddenly your fault. So a lot of gaslighting, blaming. So you're the victim, blaming yourself even though it was their fault, and they turn things against you. So a lot of these signs, someone may say, I see it in my own relationships, and the whole point of it is that this is why we're discussing it. That it happens more often than we imagine. And from an Islamic perspective, it's somebody who's not giving another person the due justice that a Muslim deserves, the huquq, the rights that they deserve. And Muslim akhul Muslim, and Muslim is the brother and the sister of a fellow Muslim. And the reasons why we're mentioning this hadith is to remind us that even our interactions with anybody have to be characterized by Islam and Iman. So if we're Muslims, we're not supposed to be engaging in any behaviors where we're going to harm the person. And Muslim al Muslim haram, maluhu damuhu wa irduhu. A Muslim to non-Muslim is haram, means sacred, their money, their wealth, their blood, and the honor. So essentially, anything to do with this kind of behavior is un-Islamic, as we'll come to the ruling of it's haram. But before continuing, we must differentiate and demark the difference between toxic and abusive relationships, because obviously they have different solutions as well, and they're not the same. So some of the experts and psychologists, they say that there is a bit of a difficulty at times in trying to differentiate toxic from abusive. And so the rule is all abusive relationships are toxic, but not all toxic relationships are abusive. So all abusive relationships are toxic, but not all toxic are abusive. Both toxic and abusive relationships involve disrespect and violation of boundaries. That's the key word, boundaries. So both relationships, somebody is violating somebody else's boundaries. That's very important. And this is whether they communicated those boundaries or not. The boundaries which are considered healthy and normal, they're being violated. Toxic behaviors are sometimes unintentional, and that's one of the differences. People who are toxic sometimes don't know they are, even their lack of self-awareness. Okay, whereas the person is abusive, right? Then they know they're intentionally doing this, and they intended to harm, control, manipulate, and exercise power over another individual. So abusive relationships are worse than abusive people because they know deliberately what they're doing. In fact, they're doing it on purpose. They're doing it on purpose because this person has a lot of issues that they need to work on themselves, so they take it on other people. Right? Maybe themselves, they have other, right? They need to go and get help, obviously, but they're not. So what they're doing is they're abusing others. And another one is to do the degree of harm. The difference in degree of harm. In abusive relationships, the degree of harm is much more severe. It includes things like physical violence or threats of violence, severe emotional manipulation, post-separation abuse, coercive control. So this is very serious and dangerous, a lot of danger to a person's dunya and their deen. It affects the person's physical sense, it affects the person's mental health, the person's psychological health, the person's wealth, controlling the person's movements, abusing them or trying to threaten to take violence on them. So that's called abusive. So obviously that's very severe. Whereas toxic is harmful but lesser degree. And that is things like harm, like criticism, right? Lots of criticism, lack of support. And some may say these, as we'll see in a second Islamically, some experts say there's a bit of subjectivity at times in trying to determine whether something's toxic, abusive, only because sometimes it matters. It depends on what is considered harm that's higher or lower, right? Some people might say it feels abusive. Some might say it's toxic. None of them are correct, right? So that's a good news. Then this is all unacceptable. But a person should know that there are levels, and sometimes depending on if the level, the course of action might be more immediate. For example, abusive relationships, the action must be escalated, right? In terms of solution, the person must get immediate help to be safe, and you're not allowed to tolerate that. For example, someone's life or the deen's in danger. There's no, as I want to mention some of the steps, you should jump the last step. So it's very important to understand just even characterizing it. But let's take it from an Islamic perspective then. What about Islamically? So from an Islamic perspective, a lot of toxic behaviors can be classified as abusive. And I'm saying this because I was preparing for this lecture, I was looking at some of these traits, the behaviors, and all of them fall into what's called Islamically al-isa. Al-isa'atu is abuse or wrongdoing or harm. It's a term for behaviors which are a wide range of hurtful statements and actions. So statements, actions that are designed to harm an individual. And al-isa'a, the ulama, they say, is essentially any deliberate intentional harm to another person's body, mind, emotions, wealth, right, deen, all these, and it's a very comprehensive term. And so the reason I'm beginning with this is that Islamically, you could say, Wallahu a'lam, people who are toxic are involved in an isa, right, some kind of abuse. But then it also doesn't always mean physical, like it's part of it. An example, Al-Izz bin Abdul Salam, rahimahullah, he has a book called Shajaratul Ma'arif wal-Ahwal wal-Salih al-Aqwal wal-A'mal, in which he lists various good deeds, behaviors, and various evil deeds and behaviors. And he counted at least, again, he numbers them, under the title of Al-Isa, or the chapter of the section about abusive behavior, he lists at least 152 different abusive behaviors and statements. 152. And this is so interesting because number one, Islamic is a rich resource. It brings evidence for each one, or a hadith for every statement, every single abusive behavior. So it's very important to pay attention to this because many of us might be unintentionally, keyword, unintentionally toxic without even knowing it. Just so another way of looking at it, if you're not doing what's Islamically correct, if you're engaging in harmful behavior, which is haram in Islam, as if you call it harm or you call it abuse, you call it toxic, all of it's haram. If you're unaware, then it's a good place to look. Some examples of those he mentions I cited below: cutting off people's rights, cursing a Muslim, having hostility towards them, reminding others of one's favor, and men, right? It's manipulative, right? Remember, right? Telling people the good they did to them so you can get what you want. Divulging secrets, profane speech, profanities, betraying others in menial matters, right? So breaking small promises for no reason, right? But again, it goes back to some of these aggressions, which are even the micro level: mockery, backbiting, gossipy, tale carrying, envy, and list goes on. And there's so many. I guess there's some of them. And again, the reason why this is where we got to start, because even some of us, we must first look, right? Before someone says they're a victim, they must also make sure they're not an aggressor, right? But also the benefit we take that Islamically, there's such a Islam has come to teach us what good character looks like and good behavior. وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon a high, lofty moral character. We're supposed to imitate him. We're supposed to be on that way. Hassan. You're supposed to treat people in the best way. What's interesting now, before continuing, is that if there's such a wide range of behaviors that can be toxic or abusive, the good news in Islam, as long as it's un-Islamic, right? Again, once they're prohibited, call it toxic, call it abusive, the ruling is the same as haram. Some of the behaviors obviously can be a lower level of haram now, but as a Muslim, the golden rule, as we're going to come to, la darar wa la dirar. They should not be harming others and reciprocating harm to others. No harming others and reciprocating harm. That's the rule. So if you're not sure the behavior that you're receiving or giving to another person is good, or is it correct, just think to yourself, is it harmful? Because that word, la hadith, la darar, la dirar, is very important. La, which is a prohibition, a negation, and darar is indefinite. So it gives generality. There is no such thing as harm in the Sharia that's allowed, and no harming others. And it's a general rule across the board. Every single bab chapter from Abwab al-Fiqh and Abwab al-Mu'amalat, dealings, there's not allowed to harm others. So as Muslims, we need to pay attention to these things, because sometimes what is considered normal is not normal. But to give you quickly understanding, there's al-isa'a and then there's ada. Ada is called harm, and al-isa'a is also harm, but you could say can translate as abuse. Both of them are wrong, right? So this is important. Both of them are wrong. But someone might say, okay, what about people who are harming me to a lesser degree? Well, you may say, okay, this is not abusive, this is toxic, but still not allowed. So in Islam, there's levels of harm which is small, harm which is big. But at the end of the day, all harm is prohibited. So for example, if you go to Surah Al-Imran, ayah 111, قال الله تعالى لن يضروكم إلا أذى. They don't harm you except by أذى. Ulama, some of the Mufassirin say أذى ضرر يسير, a small amount of harm. But that doesn't mean that it's still acceptable, right? The people who harm Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahaba, they're harming them with darar. Adha, here's lesser degree of harm. And then, of course, there's higher level. Still, it's not allowed. But the point I'm trying to highlight is sometimes what happens in our relationships, our dealings, we tend to qualify what is toxic and what is not on a wrong measure. Quran and Sunnah, we have to check, what do you think is harmful? It has to go back to Quran and Sunnah. What is toxic? What's abusive? Because otherwise, we might engage in those behaviors and accuse somebody else of being abusive or toxic when you yourself may be also guilty. And that's why you have to start with yourself. So that's important to check this. And as resources available, you can find online this book. The effects of toxic relationships. They have detrimental effects on the quality of life of the victim. And so the person who's a victim, they have many impacts. That's why they're so dangerous. It lowers self-esteem, it lowers your self-esteem, creates social isolation, depression, worse quality of sleep. Like your self-care routines may go down because you don't have a strong sense of self, you're distracted. The overall quality of life is down. Right? Also, it can lead to physical harms as well if the person is engaging in the physical abuse, or so it's escalating to that level, etc. So the effects of toxic relationships are definitely present, and they are documented, and they're definitely dangerous. And that's why when you engage with people who are toxic, they harm your dunya and your deen. Their dunya, because they're harming your physical, your mental, your psychological, and your physical well-being. And also you're dealing because they're bringing bad things out of you. So, for example, they backbiting cause you to backbite as well. They might shout at you and you retaliate by shouting back and other such behaviors which are not healthy. And so at the end of the day, these kinds of things are common, right? They're very common. And the people today have to start thinking about it, right? In terms of why this is happening, right? Why are we doing this? And the reason might be the person who's toxic, they themselves, right? They need help. They need help. And we'll see the solution is to get that person help. But also ourselves, we need to also realize that the person who's in a toxic relationship, what some of the harms that come is that they start to normalize this relationship and the effects of it. And the example of that, it goes back to the attachment system that's created in a toxic relationship, right? And so obviously that's a different topic altogether, the attachment theories and a theory and structure, but it's connected here. People who have toxic relationship tend to normalize over time. They consider the toxic relationship as normal, and then they tend to gravitate towards other toxic relationships outside of their normal relationships. So, for example, if they're used to a toxic relationship while a child, they're growing up, they may then move into toxic relationships when they get married. And the reason they found is that it has to do with the psychological element. The toxic relationships, they lower serotonin, increase cortisol, right? So a person has then the sense of increase cortisol, lower level of serotonin, and overall, what happens then is that this kind of mix creates a constant uncertainty and vulnerability and anxiety, and that becomes the normal way with which you interact with people when they're in toxic relationship. Obviously, anytime there's a new relationship, there is a mixture of neurochemical chemical connection going on or neurochemical chemicals coming together. So, for example, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, cortisol, all coming together. And what happens over time when you have a new relationship is you reach an equilibrium, right? Which eventually means that you have a normal, healthy relationship, secure relationship with the individual. A toxic relationship, it's because the other individual, right, is toxic, and you, the victim in that relationship, can never really be in a sense of calm. There is no equilibrium. There's no normalization going on. What becomes normal for you is uncertainty, vulnerability, and high levels of anxiety. And now, why is it interesting? Because then what happens if this is your normal in a relationship in which there's in many ways chaotic, all right? It's not healthy at all. When you move to secure relationships, or you try to move on and meet people with secure and healthy relationships, it becomes unfamiliar, it becomes unattractive, it becomes something not normal to you. And therefore, many people who have toxic relationships as the foundation tend to attract other people who are not, who are used to that or who are more toxic. And that's where they say, again, it's not detrimental like 100%, but it's not deterministic, like it's not 100%, but like it happens often that way. And so toxic relationships and people in there end up in more toxic relationships. So that's dangerous as well because your sense of what's considered acceptable is totally incorrect. So that's why it's worthy of thinking about it as well, like Islamically, because it's if you talk about marriages, right, and that's another topic. Maybe this is what's happening as well, right? Many of our people who are getting married or relationships are not healthy, and there's many again reasons for it, right? That's beyond our conversation right now. طيب, let's move on to the problem at hand. The real problem at hand is not the existence of toxic relationship, toxic individuals, because everyone knows about that and has witnesses somewhere in their life a toxic individual. And we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a test. The real problem at hand is when toxic relationships involve family or blood relatives, whom we are commanded by the legislation to keep ties with them and prohibited from cutting them off. So this is where the problem is coming. So you're supposed to take your responsibility of keeping ties with them. But at the same time, this person who's toxic, if they're a family member, they're harming you and you don't want to bear the harm. Okay, it's very important. So the issue at hand, the other cases, if it was a family, you could potentially just cut them off. I mean, the potential, because again, like I said, it's difficult, but it's there. So therefore, in other relationships like friends or coworkers, others, schoolmates or classmates, if they're toxic, eventually you can just phase them out of your life. You just cut them out. But the problem with the family blood relatives is, right, it says in the bold, the challenge is trying to balance between your right to be safe from harm and their right to having a relationship with you. And that's the real issue it had. And this is why it causes so much frustration. You want to keep a relationship with your mom and dad. You want to keep a relationship with your brothers and siblings, aunts, uncles, in-laws, who name it, whoever is from your blood relatives, either blood relatives, or even you can extend it to, right, relatives which are in-laws, marital, right, from marital side. But at the same time, you have the right not to be harmed. At the same time, we're not supposed to cut off ties of kinship, right? So this is important. Qati' rahim, right? And qati'at rahim is a major sin. What do you do? And this is why this topic is so important, because if we look carefully at what are people actually doing? People are doing either one of two things. Either they are just succumbing, they're accepting that this harm is okay, it's normal. Worst case, self-blame. They think they deserve it. Billah. So they're just getting abused and violated and harmed, and they're not doing anything about it. And the second extreme might be, or second polar opposite, is somebody might just run away from that relationship altogether. So jump to cutting off ties with no conditions or no restrictions. And that's also un-Islamic as well. It means there are times where it's allowed and there's times we're not allowed. So everybody's following right now, this is what's happening. And if you just take a look, again, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, counselor, any of this. But just anecdotally, I think most people would admit, if you look at your friends and family and yourself, you notice in most people, what they tend to be doing is they're just bearing it without any kind of guidelines and help. And it becomes very difficult. And over time, they burn out or they get into a state where it's very damaging, to the point that maybe they harm themselves in trying to do the right thing. And sometimes, as you said, as we'll see, it's not even what they were doing was not correct. They were doing the right thing with the right intention, but the action maybe wasn't the right. So today's presentation is really giving us that gradation, that levels. What are the solutions? And I'm going to present 6 of them, all right, all together. But before going there, we must talk about what the solution will look like, which is two-pronged. So the solution Islamically, right? So this is the bulk of today's lecture. Is now that we know a little bit about toxic relationships and what they are, how damaging they are, the important part is the solutions. That's what the point of today's presentation is, to spend more time on the solutions. And I'm going to spend more time on the strategies for the victim than on a toxic person, because toxic person is very difficult to deal with and they require professional help. That's what they require. And so if a person, as we'll see, identifies with one or two, our goal today is really deal with the solutions for the victim. As for the person who's a toxic individual themselves, they obviously, we're going to address them a little bit in a minute, but they really require professional help, as we'll see in the why. But it's two-pronged solution, twofold. Number one, we have to change the behavior of the toxic person. They got to change, and pressure has been put on them from the community or the family or the person in their life to go get that change they need to change. And a second, the strategy for the victim to take to protect themselves from the harm of the toxic person. So the reason I'm saying is that we're not putting all the responsibility on the victim, because that's the problem, right? In toxic relationship, the toxic person may say it's a person's fault. You're making me behave this way. All right, this is very important. Making me behave this way, which means that it's your fault, self-blame or gaslighting, etc. And the second thing we don't want to do is we don't want to leave the person who is toxic just to continue, because if the victim does leave them or has put up the proper system to protect themselves, it doesn't guarantee change. So Islamically, the Quran and Sunnah, Islamic legislation has given us cure for both individuals. The person who's toxic must fear Allah and repent and stop their behavior immediately. Otherwise, they're under a serious threat of Allah's punishment, because they're doing dhulm. Al-isa'a, abuse, and toxicity is a dhulm, it's oppression. That's what it is. It's a synonym. Al-isa'atu the ulama say, is a synonym for dhulm, for oppression. And we know dhulm, dhulmat yawm al-qiyamah. Allah la yuhibbu al-dhalimin. Allah doesn't those who are oppressors and those who do dhulm. So the key I'm saying is because we need to bring our Islamic elements to taqwa and good character and God, muraqabah, fear of Allah, khawf from Allah, and taqwa and muraqabah, awareness of Allah to the person who's toxic, because they don't realize it. They're under serious trouble. At the same time, giving the victim the hope that, look, you don't have to deal with this, right? It's not correct. You just get abused. So let's begin with the toxic individual quickly. So a toxic individual, right, for them, they require professional help. But here it says, experts say that fixing toxic relations is very difficult, because it is not possible for one person to change the behavior of another. So really, we can't change their behavior. They have to change their own. But instead, the effort to repair the relationship has to center on attempting to convince the other person to change. So there you go, the tricky part. You can change them, but in order for things to change, you have to get them to start changing. Either getting them to find a way to change. So what is the leverage? They say the threat of leaving the relationship or limiting the interaction. Leverage right now. So this is the leverage because the toxic person, this is what they don't want. I mean, it's ironic, right? Because they're doing abusive behaviors, hoping the person will stay, not leave. Right? This is very important. Right? They don't want you to leave, but they're doing harmful behaviors that are going to cause you to leave. So what they need to know is that, listen, if this continues, I am on the way out. Either I'm going to leave, or if it's like, again, family, relative, siblings, I have boundaries. You're not going to ever be able to cross. This thing won't go the same way again. You're going to have a different relationship altogether. So the key we're taking from this is you have to understand the tricky part here. Now, for Islamic perspective, you have to bring in the part that this haram what they're doing. Again, Abdul, if you look in his book, he mentioned these different sins and abusive, toxic behaviors. Some of them, clearly, many of them are major sins, if not most of them. And some of them go up higher. At the end of his book, he gets to some of them which are like even higher level of sins, right? So the key is like if it's major sin, right? Obviously, if it's not usually kufr, but it's major sin, right? That's between major and lesser sin. So let's give an example. One way for a toxic person to really change up, they have to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, repent, and apologize and communicate to the victim if they're really trying to change. And look, he has a chapter in acknowledging abuse and wrongdoing. Then he brings the story of Prophet Yusuf and his brothers. For the story of Prophet Yusuf and his brothers, the story of a toxic relationship. And they're going to bring down a lot of these evidences now. The Quran and Sunnah is full of this. Examples of prophets and messengers who went through toxic relationships. The issue of Prophet Yusuf's story, many of us, we're familiar, from all of us, how difficult he had a time with his brothers. Right? They were jealous of him. They threw him in the well. So many years passed, but at the end, when he forgave them, and they owned up to their mistake, they admitted it. They said, قالوا تالله قد آثرك الله علينا وإن كنا لخاطئين. By Allah, indeed Allah has preferred you over us, and certainly we have been sinners. So acknowledgement, admission. Then in the next page, ayah 97, Allah says that they say to their father, قالوا يا أبانا استغفر لنا ذنوبنا. Oh, our father, please ask Allah to forgive us for our sins. إن كنا خاطئين. إن كنا خاطئين. We were very been sinners. So he says that in acknowledging abuse and wrongdoings is subsiding of the anger of the oppressed. That's the first step. By admitting it, I'm sorry I did this wrong to you. And the problem with toxic people is that they don't they're not aware of what they're doing wrong, right? That's one. Or they don't want to admit it by trying to blame you. But look what he says. When they acknowledged it, it subsides the anger of the oppressed and draws nearer to pardoning. It creates the door for pardoning. Because once you're the victim, someone told you, I'm sorry. It could be a parent. It could be a child, a mother or father telling the child after years, I'm sorry for what I did many years ago. Or older brother, in this case, right? They're stepbrothers, right? Yusuf salam and his older brothers, and they're telling him, sorry, we were wrong. But here's the problem with regarding the focusing too much on a toxic person, even though it's part of the solution. It says in the bottom there that the person who's toxic might not admit it, either because they're not aware of what they're doing wrong, or number two, the habit they have of blaming others, or it may take a very long time. So fa'idah, benefit. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, from the time that he saw the dream and then when they put him in the well, up until he sought forgiveness, how long was that? Some of us sitting, they say it was 40 years. From the time Yusuf saw the dream until it was actualized, 40 years. So Yusuf is a grown man, they're grown people. And now they're saying sorry. And he accepted immediately, right? And that's the power of Yusuf's story, because look at Yusuf alayhi salam. They abused him, took advantage of him, they sold, put him in the well, later was sold in slavery, jail, everything. There is no pardon of blame on you today, no reproach on you today. Yusuf's story is a powerful story of recovery and a powerful story for psychology and therapy. But the point of it is going to take here, how many years it took for them to say sorry. So sometimes it's a window, but it might not happen short term or even possibly, right? Depends on the individual. But no doubt that's a different story. That the toxic person needs professional help. That's a summary for them. They need professional help, and they need to know that they themselves, by being toxic, are harming themselves, their dunya and their akhirah. Their dunya and their akhirah, they're harming both. And just to give you a fa'idah, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, he mentions that the toxic individuals who are abusive to others, they have they're suffering themselves. I mean, someone may ask, well, why are they even doing this? There's many reasons for it. It's a huge discussion. Some of them has to do with their own upbringing, their own traumas. Someone has to do it there, right? Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Sometimes it has to do with genetics, right? Somebody is genetically disposed to certain bad traits like narcissism, which then makes them more likely to be like that. Or many narcissists are toxic people, like almost all of them. So again, could be all those elements that have nothing to do with you. But Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah mentioned the point: if you abuse others in action or you harm others, there's also a harm to coming to you. He says, for example, in his book طريق الحجرتين, page 272, he says أنه كلما ازداد الإنسان إساءة ازداد وحشا or وحشة, right? Anytime a person increases in abusing others and harming them, he increases in loneliness. Because Ibn Qayyim is saying sins create loneliness. And this is very important. Toxic person not happy themselves. They themselves are lonely because they are the sins that they're committing. They're oppressing others. And it's important. Some may say, which one goes first? Are they lonely, tend to toxic, or the toxic causes loneliness? Wallahu a'lam. Right? Something to research, right? It could be one or other. It could be right, either or. He also says, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, أن أخوف الناس أشدهم إساءة. That the people who are most fearful, or the most anxiety and fears, are people who are most abusive to others. So the reason I'm saying that is because toxic people, they're not like they're winning anything here. They're not happy. Their behavior might be in order to mask their own insecurities. They're doing this. But what happens? They're getting a worse situation. So they need help. They need help. That's my point. They need help. But since we cannot force them to change, and it requires obviously professional help, we advise everyone, if you know people who are like that, or you yourself are engaging toxic behavior, you should fear Allah and stop that. But we need to get the people the professional help that they need. But let's move on to the victim, because this is the main focus. How can we help the victim? So here's a summary of what the victim should be doing. Then I'm going to give the Islamic summary. It says here, the process involves confronting the toxic person about their behavior. It is necessary to set boundaries as to what behavior the non-toxic person will tolerate. This will often cause the toxic person to escalate the behavior in an effort to reassert control, and the non-toxic person needs to make it clear that those boundaries are a requirement for the relationship to continue. If the toxic person persists, the other person needs to be prepared to end the relationship. In adult, parent, or child sibling situations where permanent separation is not possible or desirable, it may be necessary to severely limit contact. Teens and children in toxic relationship with family or others should seek the help of a trusted adult for guidance. And that's a nice point that I highlighted for a reason, is that this is the summary, the solution from the practical and psychological perspective, that they need to communicate their boundaries to the toxic person. Going forward, this is not going to happen again. There's going to be new ways of interaction. There's going to be boundaries for the non-toxic individual. And of course, toxic person is not going to like this. So what they're going to do, they're going to escalate, right, in order to gain control. When they can't, then they're going to obviously see that there's going to be a problem here. So they have to know that if you continue this way, you're going to leave. But then I highlighted the point where we're talking about today. If family relationship, you can't leave, in a sense that you cannot cut them off either totally, as we'll see the rules, or you're going to cut them off, but at the last resort. So what do? You diminish or limit the contact. That's key. This is where people, they get stuck, because again, you're talking about people, let's say you're talking with your mom, your uncle, your aunt, your brother, your sister. I can't just cut them off. And if I do, am I sinful? We're going to learn that today. There's rules, and you're not always sinful for doing that as long as you're following the rules. At the same time, you have to know the rules, because you can't jump to the final solution without looking at it. From a Islam perspective now, here's a summary of our points, and I'm gonna explain each one, and then we're gonna finish for question and answers. So this is a summary. Number one, the summary for Islamic solution to fixing toxic family relationships: you have to get help. Seek therapy or help from an imam or person of knowledge. So if you're a victim, you need to seek therapy and counseling to help yourself heal, but also you need to go to an imam or person of knowledge to find out what to do. It's very important, because what's happening in the beginning is that people are suffering in silence. They don't know what to do. So let's say, for example, a relationship is going toxic. It's already toxic and you don't do anything about it. Sooner rather than later, you get harmed. So what do you need to do? And to ask an imam, someone I trust, what do I do? And we're going to see the example of Sahaba that used to do this. They sought Rasul's help all the time. Number two, understand what's happening. Know it's a test from Allah, avoid self-blame. So you have to understand this is a test from Allah. Allah made for some of us, for others, what? A fitna, a tasbirun. So sometimes what happens, the psychological framing of it is wrong. For example, if your whole life you had lots of toxic individuals in your life, you say, well, I guess it must be me. No. If it's you, unless you're doing something wrong yourself personally, it's not you. Because Allah's testing you, and Allah wants good people, He tests them, right? Test is different than uquba, punishment. So we must not confuse the two. Next, we must also understand that you have boundaries. What are they? You have to set them up. And we're going to talk about what those are. Very important. And communicate them to the toxic person. And if you can't communicate them, you just adhere to them. Like, I mean, communicating is better, but just adhere to it. And the key is to stick to that. Fourthly, do not return to behavior, toxic behavior, toxic behavior. That's very tempting, but it's wrong. It doesn't solve anything, right? So someone's toxic, don't be toxic back. It's going to harm you. And number five, limit interaction with a toxic family member. Well, again, if this doesn't work, number five, you go to limit their interactions. And number six, the final one, which doesn't work, when you're doing your deen or in danger, so you're harmful to your body, your mind, your deen, and your dunya. Right? It's just, I mean, this is too much out of hand, you cut them out. It's family members. And we're gonna see who, and when does that happen. The key is that there's 6 levels, right? Stages, or like you say, solutions. You go in order. The key, though, the focus, the really helpful ones are 3 and 4. And then if they still don't work, they're 5 and 6. And 6 is the last one. But some people, like we said, they go into number 6, just cutting them off. It does that's okay for friends or neighbors or friend people who like coworkers who you tried. A family, you can't just do that without rules, right? And the same thing, we don't want people just say nothing, right? Some people they do nothing. Question is asking here, yes, the recording will be there. Don't worry, everything is recorded. So inshallah will be shared with ta'ala and the notes. Okay, let's go one by one, inshallah, because of the time. I don't want to miss time for Q&A. So number one, getting help. And this means you got to go to a trusted person of knowledge, an imam, a student of knowledge who you trust to seek help as to what to do. And also therapy and counseling, because if you're being affected by it, you need that as well. You yourself need to get your counseling for the impact of it. And the proof now, Asma radiallahu anha, look at this. Asma bin al-Bakr radiallahu anha, Sahabiya, well known, right? She says during the period of treaties, peace treaty between Quraysh and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So treaty of Hudaybiyah, it was a treaty, right? The Quraysh and the Muslims were on a peace treaty, so the time of stability and safety. She said, my mother, accompanied by her father, came to visit me. And she was a pagan. Okay, it's important. So Asma is the daughter of Abu Bakr, her Abu Bakr's wife here, the first one, because Asma is old and Aisha. Her mother is a non-Muslim, and she didn't accept Islam, and most of the scholars say that she died upon disbelief or by paganism. Hence why Abu Bakr, he divorced her. She says now, when she came to visit me, I consulted Allah's Messenger sallallahu and the Messenger sallallahu said, my mother has come, right? She said, my mother has come to me and she desires to receive a reward or provision from me. Should I keep good relations with her? Prophet said, yes, keep good relations with her. Hadith Bukhari, it's also in Muslim others. Okay, what's the interesting part of this hadith? Why did Asma ask Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam? And this is the key, why? So scholars explain what was the problem. Her mother is a polytheist, mushrikah. Okay, no problem. But she's hostile towards Islam. She didn't come to Medina as muhajirah to emigrate to hijrah. She came for financial help. Some scholars say she came to get closer to, what's her name, Asma, to live beside her, become like her neighbor. She came to her and she doesn't like her religion. So some of that riwayat in Muslim Ahmed Allah says she came with a gift as well. So Asma is worried. What does she want after so many years? While she's married to Zubair bin Awam now, she has children. My mom's coming. She doesn't like it. The wording the hadith mentions, she doesn't like her Islam and her hijrah. So what does she want? She doesn't know. So Asma was afraid of a harmful interaction with her mom, or that she'd be sinful if she accepted her, or she if not rejected her. So the benefit we take. This was a situation which obviously would create anxiety for anybody if you're not sure what a person's intention was. But the benefit I want to take. Sheikh Salim Hilali, Habibullah Ta'ala, he mentioned in the Sharh Riyadh Salihin, it is obligatory to ask people knowledge. It's benefit from hadith. It's obligatory to ask people knowledge if a question is on a scholar. So for those reasons, Asma was eager in regards to affairs of religion, which indicates the knowledge precedes statement action. She was not sure what to do with her mom and what her intention was. Should I accept her? And that's why some scholars say it wasn't that the fact that she was trying to become Muslim. Because if her mom wanted to accept Islam, Asma would have invited her. She was worried. Should I let her into my house, give her financial aid? I don't know what she wants. Is she trying to persuade me away from Islam? What is this? So the first benefit we take from this, when there's familial issues like this, going to who? People of knowledge. That's the first step. And we need to encourage people to do that. There's no need to suffer in silence. And if you don't have any imam in your community, or a student of knowledge or someone who could take the role, go to somebody who's trusted. Somebody who you trust, right? Somebody who you trust, who's older or more wise, or friend who can help you and try to get their advice. That's the first one. Number two, understand what's happening. We already mentioned the ayah, and we're going to repeat it. And we made some of you as a trial for others. We have patience, and your Lord is ever all seeing everything. So people are going to be trial for you in your life. The question then is, it's a test. ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. Allah wants to see who's going to do the best of good deeds. So hence, as long as you are doing the right thing, you're doing your wajibat, you're not doing toxic behavior, you're not doing haram, but somebody else is toxic in your life, it's them, not you. You cannot self-blame. That's what a toxic person wants. They want to say, oh, it's you. You see, you deserve this. You're making me behave this way. No. And oftentimes, like I said, self-blame comes because the toxic person will gaslight the victim into believing it's them. So let's give an example. Are you doing anything haram in your relationship? Are you swearing, backbiting? Are you like falling short in the hukuk, the rights? If not, then it's them, not you. So it's a test. The difference between the two, we said, an uquba, a punishment, versus a test, an ibtila. Uquba is a punishment for sins you committed. So let's say I'm abusing them too. I'm also toxic. Then yeah, if they're toxic back to me, it's both of us. We're both sinful. So I have to repent. If I'm doing the right thing and they're doing wrong things towards me, what is it to test? It's a test. So don't blame yourself, because when Allah loves the people, He tests them. Who had the problems in their families? Prophets, the messengers, alayhimus salam, Sahaba, so many examples. We're going to mention another one coming next. So why we're not different? Take solace in knowing that you're not the only one. Yusuf had a problem in his family. Ibrahim alayhi salam had a problem in his family. Sa'id ibn Waqqas had a problem in his family. So many Sahaba had a problem in their family. And the reason why I couldn't mention all their stories because there's not enough time. So there's a good benefit there, right? Know what's going on. Have the right understanding and framework. Number 3, know your boundaries and communicate them to the toxic person. And this is the part which is the beginning for the solution of fixing the course of the relationship. For familiar toxic relationships, the victim has their rights violated as a result of not knowing the boundaries that Islam has given them. And the rule in Islam is there's no harm nor reciprocating harm. So there's never a situation where a person is supposed to harm you unless you did something wrong and a person, like a mother and father or a guardian, if your mother and father not there, they're doing what's called ta'deeb. Ta'deeb is discipline and correcting character. So we know a child, when they misbehave, the parent has to correct their behavior. They do what's called ta'deeb. So ta'deeb is different. I'm making a mistake. Someone who's supposed to be my guardian is correcting me. But if you're older, there is still going to be that element of advice and stuff. But what's happening? What's harm? What's the difference? Here's the key. The ulama say harmful behavior. Sometimes something could be harmful, but it could be instrumental, and it could be purposeful. So, for example, if I stop talking to you, well, that's not good, right? I stop talking to you for what reason? So because you told a lie. So I'm trying to correct your behavior by ignoring you temporarily, so you can admit your fault. Nabi Sallallahu used that strategy before with his family because he hated lying and was very strict on it. What kind of behavior is that? Is that abusive or toxic? No, that's corrective. But now let's imagine I'm not doing anything wrong and somebody's abusing me. Harm is not allowed. It's not allowed. So what's happening to you have to know that this person is doing wrong to you. But then what happens is that the person, most people know when something's wrong, but you don't know what your boundaries are because family, as we said, they're very close. So they may use techniques like religious blackmail to violate your boundaries to get what they want. And often parent-child relationships with older family relatives, siblings, uncles, aunts, they're going to be using some form of manipulation. And this is where it gets tricky because you know it's not right, but I don't know if I'm right to do something about it. So you don't know what to do, and they know what they're doing is not right. So they win and you lose because you don't have the concept of what to do. And I believe a lot of people, they misunderstand Islam because of this. Some people think I have to bring my parents unrestrictedly. Absolutely not true. There's boundaries for everything. Only one we're supposed to obey unrestricted is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So everything else, bil ma'ruf, in goodness, right? Let's talk about parents now. We're going to talk about boundaries now for parents and child relationships, so you know what to do. Number 1, parents should be respected and treated well, right? That's the key. Be good to your parents. Number 2, parents, despite their behavior towards their children, you must obey them in that which is halal and good. So if they're falling short in some angle, it doesn't mean that you have to disobey them in other angles where it's halal. So this is the foundational part, that there must be a balance between what you do and what you don't do. You can't be disrespecting them all the time. You have to correct them. You have to obey them what's ma'ruf, as it comes in the hadith Nabi Sallallahu told us, right? To obey your father as long as he's alive, and he prohibited disobedience to the mothers. That's the general rule. Okay, so this is very important because it's also helpful with the technique. When you obey them in the right places, then you will be able to stand strong in places where it's wrong. But if you disobey them all the time, then there's no benefit in that relationship, right? You're going to be a disobedient child. But here's the part where you have to know. Here's the boundary. The principle when it comes to obedience to parents, and we studied this before in in a dawra, this seminar we did in Masjid Istiqama. It's also, I believe, recorded on YouTube. We talked about the parents and the rule. The ulama mentioned Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah Kitab al-Kubra and Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen Sharh al-Mumti'. They say a child obeys their parents in that which is beneficial to the parent and not harmful to the child. Key has to be mubah, permissible, or beneficial for the child, provided there's no harm to the child. Key, no harm, not darar, not dirar. So if they try to tell you do something, or they don't want you to do something which is beneficial for them or permissible, the question you need to ask is it harming me? And when I say harming, I'm not talking inconvenience. I'm talking about harm. For example, telling me what to eat, what to wear when I'm a grown person, or who to marry or not to marry without my consideration. Harm. It's not allowed, right? You have to be, remember, there's rules. So let's say a parent is abusing, telling you, micro-controlling your life. Not allowed. You don't have to listen. But see the balance? If you know that's the principle, so now we're going to then say that if they tell you something halal to do and good, and doesn't harm you, and it's nothing, then you obey them. And when it's harmful, you stand for yourself and say, I'm not going to do it. And you're not going to be yelling and shouting when you do that. As we stated in the class, you're going to do it with kindness and gentleness. But you see the problem with having today, people don't know this principle. So they say, oh, parents told me I have to do it. No, this is where the religious abuse is going to come. And now here's a boundary. A boundary usually is organized in if-then statements. Boundaries, statements, or if-and-then statements. So if a parent tries to use religion to blackmail the children, to obey them in something haram or harmful, then the child does not have the right to have to obey them. That's the word. That's how we're going to frame it. If then. So to know something's a boundary, you put in that language. If then boundary, if then statements. If a parent tries to tell you to do something haram or harmful, then you don't have to obey. If it's not, then you do obey. But the key word in using blackmail now, the story of Sa'd bin Muqas, I mentioned this before in the parenting class. I'm going to bring it again and summarize it. Sa'd bin Muqas' mother, she wanted him to leave Islam. So what did she say? She took an oath that she would never talk with him until he abandoned his faith, and she neither ate or drank until he did so. After a couple of days, 2-3 days passed, she fainted, and then her son had to come and give her water, and Allah revealed the ayah in Surah and Ankabut and also Surah Quran about being good to the parents. But what was the key here? She tried to use her parental authority to get him to leave Islam. Is that harmful? Harmful to his akhirah and his deen, dunya. So he didn't listen. Now watch this. The other version of the hadith in Tabari and others, look what it said. His mother said, she said to his mother, oh mother, know by Allah that if you had 100 souls and each left one by one, I would not leave my religion for this. If you wish, then eat. If you wish, then don't eat. So he was very strict with her. One of the riwayat of the hadith, it says that she said to him, and watch this sophisticated manipulation she tried to use. She said, in your religion, Allah tells you to obey your mother, and I'm telling you to leave Islam. You see, she used this technique. Allah says, obey me, so you have to obey me, leave Islam. He said, no. He stood firm. And a summary of Sa'ad's behavior, even though he was a little bit harsh, which the Quran tells us be good to them, but Allah didn't criticize Sa'ad's mawqif. His position was correct. Shaykh Uthaymeen in Sharh Tafsir of Surah Luqman, it says, when she saw that the man, Sa'ad, was so determined, she broke her oath. You see, if you don't budge when it comes to the blackmail, religious blackmail, abuse, then they're gonna learn. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. If you, for example, they say, "Oh, you have to listen to me. You can't do this," and it's something they're not allowed to tell you, you just stand firm and don't do it, but don't yell and shout. Just be nice. The key is that knowing the boundary, right? Next, you have to communicate this to them, and if you're able to, then you just do what your Islamic allowed to. So, for example, your parents ask you something's unreasonable or it's haram or harmful, you just don't do it, but you don't have to yell and shout. Don't make it worse. Don't be toxic in return. Just don't do it. But firmness is going to what happens? It's going to annoy the toxic person or the person who's trying to control, and they're going to realize it doesn't work, and over time they're going to leave you alone. Because when Sa'ad showed that firmness, her mom knew it's not going to work. Now watch this. If a parent tries to misquote scriptural evidence to control a child, then a child should ask for knowledge and not follow the parents' view blindly. An example of this, some parents do this now. They try to abuse the narrations. For example, you and your wealth belong to your father. This hadith is abused by people. Anta wa maluka li abik. What does the hadith mean? It means your wealth belongs to your parents. No, it means the wealth is permissible for them time of need. Lamu libaha, not lamu tamlik. Right? So kind of mentions in Nail Talib. Lamu libaha means one time of need you can give them your wealth and you have to ask your permission. You have to give it to them, help them. But doesn't mean you and your wealth are all owned by them. Financial abuse. Right? So there are cases like this where they used to use the hadith and say, oh, all your money is mine. It's like, la hawla quwwata billah. Where did the Sharia says that? And that's why the Sahabi, whose son, right, the son and the father who kept saying to Rasulullah about his father taking his money, this is where the hadith came. And the benefit in the hadith is that they both took it to Rasul to seek clarity, explanation, the situation, and like we said, getting help. How about when it comes to older siblings or uncles, aunts relationship? They can't use the obedience discussion because they don't have the right to obedience. So what this is very important. Ta'ah, obedience, belongs to the person who's your guardian, your parents, those who have the ability to ta'deeb, to guide you. As for older siblings, family members, uncle, aunts, you should be respected and honored. They have ihtiram and ihsan, good to them. But they don't have ta'ah, obedience. Very important. Caregivers, unless your elder sibling or uncle, aunt is your caregiver, the fuqaha, the jurists say they don't have the right to obedience. So they can't tell you to do something bad, just obey them. You don't have to. And this is important. Even an older brother is not your father. Unless, of course, your father passed away and he's your guardian. And so the old people who have that authority, these scholars say, he's your parents, and for a woman when she gets married, her husband. Everyone else is we can give them advice and you respect them. So here is a boundary. If older family members command something beneficial Islamic, then a younger family member should consider the command according to the Islamic rule. So if they tell you something mustahab, it's mustahab to listen because it's something mustahab. If they tell you something good, mubah, permissible, it's permissible for you to consider, or good to be kind to listen to them to consider it. If they tell you something wajib, you listen to it because it's wajib in Sharia. For example, they tell you get up and pray, that's a good advice. You should pray. But you see the problem when they overstep. And how can they do it? When they might tell you do something that's harmful or haram, or you don't like it. It's not your preference. What to go, where to study, what to eat. That's my business. Sharia give you the right to have autonomy there. So why is this important? They may use some techniques. Example, they might use do men, and men is to remind someone of their favor in order to get what you want, and that's considered major sin. You don't have to listen to that. For example, I say, didn't I help you when you were younger? Yes, jazakumullah khair, but they don't have to listen to you now and that. It's dangerous. It's manipulative, right? Another example, offering advice, whether it's solicited or unsolicited, in order for you then to follow it, because that's the expectation. So I give you good advice, you have to listen. And we already studied this. If they give advice, then you thank them for it, but you don't have to follow it. Ibn Hazm Muhammad beautifully said, do not give advice only on the condition that it's followed, otherwise you're a tyrant, not an advisor. Akhlaq wasir. And it's a very important quote. When they give people advice, thank them for it, but it's not wajib you take it. Be careful. Sometimes that's what happens. Like someone gave you advice, and I don't have to take it. فذكر ما أنت مذكر لست عليهم بمسيطر. Remind them, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you want a reminder, you don't have the ability to strong arm anyone. So it's very important to mention this one because this is sometimes what happens, right? And some cultures it's more common than others. So let's move on quickly. So these are the boundaries you have to understand and communicate and set. And number 4, do not return toxic behavior. So this is the most important one for today. In terms of what you can do immediately. Once you know what your boundaries are, you communicate it, you have to behave correctly. You do good to them, whatever they do to you, doesn't matter. You don't really return the favor because number 1, it's counterproductive. Number 2, it's sinful. And number 3, cause it to escalate. And here's the proof in Surah Fussilat. And it's very important. We look at this ayah and this case study. I'm going to bring this hadith because this is where you could see is the glad tidings for anyone in a toxic relationship. قال الله تعالى ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. The good deed and the evil deed cannot be equal. Repel evil with that which is better, and then verily he who between you and him there's enmity, you'll become like a close friend. Imam Sa'di writes in his tafsir rahimahullah, English translation, that if anyone mistreats you in a word or deed, especially the one who has a greater rights over you, pay attention, over you, such as relatives, friends, and the like, then respond with kindness towards him. If he cuts you off, then uphold ties with him. If he wrongs you, then forgive him. If he speaks ill of you, then in your absence or your presence, then don't respond in kind. Rather, forgive him and speak gently to him. For if he forsakes you and does not speak to you, then speak nicely to him and the first to greet him with salam. If you respond to mistreatment with kindness, you will achieve much good. And what he's saying here is not just a speech, it's actually proven. If you do good back to people who do bad to you, if you treat people who are toxic with ihsan, Allah will help you against their toxicity. Allah will help you. And that's the X factor that no one can give us this assurance except the Sharia. That if you do the right thing, Allah will give you his help and his support. And the proof for this, as we're going to see, comes in the hadith. Ibn Hazm writes beautifully, and this is encouraged. This is in order to avoid us from having the tendency to return back toxicity with toxicity. He says, a man who harms his family neighbors is viler than them. Anyone who returns evil for evil is as bad as them. It's important, as bad as them. So if you're a victim, you want to be the victim, you can't be behaving like the aggressor. Anyone who refrains from returning evil is their master, their superior, and the most virtuous amongst them. Now you know why Nabi Sallallahu he never returned those bad behaviors of Quraysh, who are his uncles and relatives. He never returned their favor to them. What happens at the end of the seerah? They all become his Sahaba. The best case study, we don't have time to get into it, Abu Sufyan, anhu, right? Prophet Sallallahu father-in-law and sworn enemy all at once. And how the Prophet dealt with him, salam, until Fath al-Mecca. It's an amazing, amazing story. Okay, let's move on now to a case study. This is the part where we can get a great glad tiding. Abu Hurairah reports from Muslim, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, man came to him and said, Rasulullah, my relatives with whom I tried to be good, have good relations with them, they sever ties with me. Whom I treat kindly, but they treat me badly. With whom I'm gentle, but they're rough to me. So all he's describing, toxicity. This is important. He said, if you are, as you said, then it's as if you're feeding them hot ashes and you continue to have a supporter against them from Allah. That's the point. You will continue to have a supporter against them from Allah as long as you do so. There's a promise from Allah. Allah is going to help you. Look at the toxicity and this disparity in the relationship. He's dutiful, they're unjust. He's loyal, they're rude. He pardons them, they curse him. He has forbearance, they anger him or have anger. And this is according to the Sharh al-Qaadir. He says this is what he means. Every time he described the quality, they do the opposite. So, brothers and sisters, we can see here that this is toxicity. Did the Prophet say, okay, in that case, just get out of there. Don't talk to them ever again? Or did he say just put up with them? No, he told them, you do the right thing, and Allah will aid you. And that's the news everyone wants to know. What's going to happen? Allah will take care of it. Scholars, they explain now. For continuing, this is the part that we're all looking for in many ways. We want the validation, the support. We want that kind of assurance. Am I okay? Things are going to go my way? Here. Abu Abbas al-Qurtubi rahimahullah writes in Tafsir and Sharh of the Hadith and Mufhim, supporter means one who aids. The meaning of the Hadith is that Allah the Exalted will support you with patience in responding to the ill manners and grant you good manners with them. And He will elevate you over them in this world and hereafter for the duration that you continue to act with them as described. So as long as you do what you're doing good, Allah is going to make you better than them. Allah is going to help you over them. Allah is going to give you, elevate your status over them in dunya and akhirah. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, sounds familiar? He treated his brothers so well. He's the minister of agriculture. They're not. They're in desperation and need. Then they seek the forgiveness. Look at that practicality of it. It's what we're all looking for. Because what happens when someone's toxic? You just feel like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to go down the same route. No, don't. Because Allah is helping you. But sabr, al-faraj ma'a, right? Ma'a sabr, right? The resolve or the solution comes with patience. And also when al-usr or in the ma'i usr yusra, difficulty, ease comes with difficulty. You have to play it all the way through. Ibn Hibban, he writes, in his excellent book, the Road to Uqara, this is Mukhtasar, English translation. The wise person should mentally prepare themselves to forgive people and not seek recurral against mistreatment and abuse, as there is nothing better for causing the cessation of mistreatment, beneficence, and there is nothing better for provoking more mistreatment than to react with similar kind. Allahu Akbar. Only such a wise word from somebody who's a scholar and person of wisdom. So if you want to end this mistreatment, you get them with ihsan. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Sahabi came and said, Ya Rasulullah, they're giving me a hard time in family. He said, Sil man qata'ak, tie the ties, the king will cut you off. Wa ahsin ila man asa ilayk, and be good to the one who's bad to you. I mean, obviously, this is not what most people are expecting immediately. But remember, we're not just saying just do that because there's no way out. We're saying that there is another steps, 2 steps I'm going to finish with. But imagine you're doing that. It's only a matter of time. Either they're going to behave themselves or they escalate and you go your way out. And I'm going to show you the benefit. Here's the summary of it because of the time. If you follow steps 3 and 4, the things are going to change. If they refuse to change, you go 5 and 6. You're going to move away slowly. There is never a solution where you do what they do. And I think that's what a lot of people, they do or they don't do anything. And I think that's the scary part. If you don't do anything, it gets worse for you. And if you do what they do, you're going to be in big trouble too. Right? You're going to be in big trouble too. Okay, let us finish here with number 5 and 6. Right? If that doesn't work, we just mentioned 3 and 4. We get now to number 5. And this is the point where we're going to see that if it's not getting better, and again, toxic people, they tend to escalate in order to gain control, then what's going to happen? You're going to limit interaction. Boycotting is haram for boycotting a Muslim more than 3 days, unless it's a religious reason. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said not permissible for a Muslim to boycott his brother beyond 3 days. However, the scholars explain that that interaction with people is of different levels depending on a person's capacity and situation. So while you can't boycott immediately, step 5 is about decreasing the interaction, limiting it to the bare minimum. So you're not going to go to the highest level, nor are you going to do the lowest level. You're not going to, cutting off. You're going to be in the middle, something above the basics, and enough that you don't get harmed. And that's step 5. If step 3 and 4 don't work, you go here. Qaadir Iyad writes, this is mentioned by Al-Aini and Abdul, tying kingship has levels of which some are higher than others. The lowest level is leaving off boycotting and tying the kingship through speech and greetings, and this differs in accordance to the ability of a person and the need. Some forms of tying the kingship are obligatory, whereas others are recommended if a person ties the kingship in some level and does not reach the highest form of tying kingship, that is not referred to as one who cut off a person. At the same time, if they fall short of what they're capable of doing and is what's necessary, then they're not called one who ties kingship. What is he trying to say there? Qaadir Iyad is saying, and if you're doing the bare minimum because there's a harm involved, you're not considered a Qaadir, one who cut off ties, a kinship. And if you're not doing the best of what you can do, and ihsan and birr and the best of your ability, you're not considered a wasil. So where are you? You're somewhere in the middle. You're not sinful, but you're also not getting the full reward. And the reason why you're going there is because the person has pushed you there. So I want to understand something here. His diagram makes you understand the levels of tying the kingship. There are 3 levels. Maratib thalath. The ulama say the maratib are 3. Al-wasil, wal-mukafi'u, wal-qati'u. And this is important. The levels of kingship, there's 3 ways to tie it. Al-wasil is the best, the one who ties the kingship even when they cut you off. Wa-ahsin man asarik, wasil man qata'ak. Tie the kingship, the one cuts you off. What does that look like? You do ihsan to them, birr, and everything in your capacity. So parents, because parents, you can never cut them off. It's very important. You can, many ulama have the view you can't cut them off. So what do you do with parents who are harmful or toxic? You always just go level 5. If it's too harmless to deal with, then you try your best, but you protect yourself at the same time, as we'll see. Number 2, and mukafi'u is the one who returns, reciprocates. They're good to you, they tie, you tie. So you're only reciprocating. You're not really doing anything more. Because he's good to you, I'm good to them. And level 3, which is where it's haram, the major sin, and qati'u, cutting off ties kinship, even if they want the ties with you. And this means no salam and no kalam. It's very important. The bare minimum. Hadith Muslim Ahmed. Bullu arhamakum walau bi salam. Bullu arhamakum means tie the kingship. Walau bi salam, even salam alaikum. Some ulama say, like Qaadir Iyad, salam wa kalam. If you say salam alaikum to a relative or family member, how are you doing? Send a message. You're considered someone who's connecting. You're not considered qati'. But you're not considered wasil either. You're not the highest level. You're somewhere in between. So that's where you're going to be. For parents, the hard part is you have to do your best. You have to do ihsan. But take the measures to guard yourself. And that's why the good news, tying kingship doesn't have a particular way to do it. It goes back to urf. With the cell phone today, with the money that we have today, you can tie kingship by sending people money, gifts, asking about them, calling them without visiting their home if it's too harmful. Use the best you can. But don't just cut them off. Don't cut off your siblings like that. Qati' is the last step we're going to see. There's ways between. Today, what's happening, like I said, is 0 to 100, zero-sum game. Some people's like, I do everything if I get abused, I harm myself to benefit others, and that's not allowed. That's not allowed. You don't harm yourself to benefit others. You benefit others, and you protect yourself at the same time. And that's a qaida, principle in Islam. There is no harming the self to benefit others. Not allowed in Sharia, not allowed. So what do? You benefit them and protect yourself. That's the point I'm talking about. So you're tying it, but you're also taking precaution not to get too close because you know they're harmful. But at the same time, you're not so far away because their harm is still not like a serious harm. It's not abusive levels, we'll see. So this is very useful because number 6, and I'll finish with this, is the boycotting. This is when you cut them off. This is when your dunya and deen are in danger. And this doesn't apply to parents. So you can't cut off the parents. You have to be ihsan. So what does that look like for the parents? You're going to be level 5. You're going to be somewhere between not cutting them off and not fully, just protecting yourself. For other parents, so other relatives, and it's very important here, if someone's abusing you physically, there's no tolerance. You have to protect yourself. But let's talk about that kind of harm. This is what we call abusive relationships. When your deen and your dunya are in the stake. In this case, Ibn Abdul Ruki writes, half Ibn Abdul he has 2 places where he says this. One in Kitab al-Istithkar, another one in Hajj Site from Fath al-Bari. He says, what I believe is that sitting with someone, talking to them is feared to cause harm to one's religion or worldly life. So this is allowed. This is not the hadith, لا يهجر أخاه فوق ثلاث. Doesn't apply here. This is أمر ديني, religious. المسلم أخو المسلم. المسلم على المسلم حرام. ماله دمه عرضه. He's harming you. This person is harming your deen and dunya. He says, increase in enmity and hatred when you deal with them. Then boycotting him and staying away from them is better than being close to him. Because he will keep tabs on your mistakes and will argue with you about what you're right about. And you will not be safe from the bad consequences of associating with them. So perhaps a beautiful separation is better than a harmful association. Allah, beautiful words. The hajrun jameel. What's hajrun jameel? You cut them off, bila adha. Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh Islam says, hajrun jameel, muqata'a, is to cut someone off, bila adha, without harming them. No, you say nothing, don't do nothing, just cut them off. Now, here's the tricky part now. This one is the last stage. I would not recommend anyone doing this unless they consult with personal knowledge to ascertain whether or not they have a right to do it. Because all the hadith we studied so far today, we looked at, they didn't mention, Nabi didn't go there. So this is very important. You don't just jump there by yourself. Highly recommend that. Because sometimes you could find the fifth solution, the fourth solution, you're not taking maybe down, and you jump into six. So six is like last case, or you can vary like life or death, or your deen and dunya are in danger. Then you have the right to protect yourself. Second part, Ibn Abdul says that the ulama have all agreed that it's allowed to boycott for more than 3 days the one who we've spoken to decreases, causes a decrease in religion or harms occurs to himself or his religion. Perhaps the beautiful abandonment is better than harmful association. Then here's the fatwa of the Lajus Da'ima where they mentioned about an uncle who's harmful, and they said, however, you think that you serve interest by severing these ties with your said uncle due to his evil deeds with you, then there'll be nothing wrong with that. Again, fatwa. So I'm saying this because it does exist. Again, some Muslims, they're in a severe situation. In that situation, we tell the person, check, ask someone knowledge, but don't tell yourself that there is no such thing as this exists. To finish, case study, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is a very beautiful example because what his father did to him. When Ibrahim gave him da'wah, his father said to him, if you don't stop this, Ibrahim, stop talking bad about our deities, I will indeed stone you to death. So get away from his sins before I punish you. Ibrahim said to him, peace be unto you, my father. I'll ask Allah forgiveness for you, for my Lord, for you. Verily he is, innahu kana bi hafiyan. Allah is ever generous. Ibn Qaadir in his tafsir, he says, that go away in peace and safety before I afflict you with a punishment from me. So look at this, abusive, right? This is abuse now. He's threatening his life. So the ulama, they mentioned the tafsir that he was in danger. So what did Ibrahim do? He said to him, salam alaikum, my peace be upon you. You will not receive any insult or harm from me. Beautiful. Ibrahim alayhi salam, hajrun jameel. You're not going to get nothing harmful from me. And then he left his father due to his respect and honor. The thing is, like, just because someone may do something to you doesn't mean you have to do that back to them. Sometimes we have to be more responsible. Yes, if that's the case, you're allowed to. But look, don't say I'm going to hajr jameel, I'm going to boycott them. You're also engaging the same, because like I said, with the parents, Ibrahim's side point, he never stopped making dua for his father until Allah revealed to him Surah Tawbah. Allah mentions that Allah revealed to him to stop making dua for him because he's going to die kafir and there's not going to be any hope for his guidance, etc. That's why Ibrahim stopped. Otherwise, Ibrahim left him, but he can make dua for him. Ibrahim's a case study of someone who grew up in that kind of environment and he grew up to be a hero. To finish, Shaykh Ibn Baz mentions that we look at Ibrahim alayhi salam. His father is a polytheist. Da'iyah, right? He's an idol maker. He's practicing openly shirk. Yet, despite this, Ibrahim strove to call his father to Islam. The point is, the parents have a great status, so the son should not abandon them. That's another thing. You have to, especially if you're practicing, don't give up on them. Sooner, inshallah, rather than later, will change. Just like Prophet Isa, he never ever gave up with his parents, or sorry, his family, his brothers. Finally, they made up. So there's hope. That's the good news. So I'll finish with this. This is the summary of it. Otherwise, there's so much more. This topic requires discussions of enmeshment, emotional enmeshment, discussions of attachment theory, and so many other things. But may Allah give us tawfiq, perhaps another time we're able to expand on these. But hopefully these can be beneficial, right, for people who are going through this, and they can use this with the proper stages and steps to find help and solution, solace for the suffering. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop with this much. When I have any questions, etc., we'll take it. I'm just gonna stop the recording so that the recording can be saved.